So Florges has now officially been banned from Scarlet and Violet NU. This was as the result of the survey that we did. You can see the results right up here, where if you look at the votes for Florges, overwhelmingly people were saying, get this mon out of my sight. You can see we almost had the typical OU supermajority voting it at a 5. We almost had that 60% threshold met. And if you're looking at just 5 or 4, we almost have 90% of total voters saying, yes, this mon is, problematic or like super problematic. So we decided, you know what? Let's quick ban it. It saves us a whole bunch of time from tiering. And we can instead start considering other possible suspect candidates. So why did Florges get quick banned? Well, let's first talk about my little post here where I detail it real quickly, where there are two main sets that comprised Florges, one of which was, in the eyes of many, very broken, and the other of which was annoying enough, especially when in tandem with the broken set. So, let's talk Choice Specs Florges, because losing Caparaja really made this mon, I think, 10 times more broken than it otherwise would have been. Caparaja was easily the best steel type of the tier. I mean, it's not hard for that when your competition is Berserker or Magneton? Or like Tinkatuff? And losing that made Specs Florges so easy to use, because realistically, what wants to switch into you? The main way we ended up having to deal with this mon, let's talk about it real quick. You had Assault Vest Electros, which, frankly, great check. It's just, you can't keep coming in forever. But you know what? Fair. You could switch in, you could scout it, you could get the slow U-turn, and then you can force Florges out. Vaporeon. Reasonable mon. Especially if you pair it up with, say, like Muck. I've mentioned this before, but Muck Vapo. Very solid into Florges. Muck can generally switch in pretty safely, especially if you're Sticky Hold. And in Vaporeon, hey, if you ever catch that Psychic from Florges, Vaporeon can always heal you back up to full. And Vaporeon's also nice because you can always have Protect to scout out Florges. Even something like Umbreon, this applies to it. Florges can't just switch into Umbreon and start Moonblasting for free, because Umbreon can always scout you safely. And as we go down the list, the amount of counterplay starts to decrease naturally. I mean, you have offensive checks like Bruxish and Metacham, which I think are both really, important to note, because Florges' speed is not the best. As we can look at the specs set right here, 273. So you're just slower than like Life Orb or Choice Band and Metacham. You're slower than Choice Band and Bruxish, and because of how bad your physical bulk was, and this was the main reason that a lot of us on Council didn't vote to quick ban it originally, alongside Barraskewda, that physical bulk is really exploitable. And so you had like these Pokemon that if you could get them in consistently versus Florges, you can minimize its effect that way. Quillfish, if you ran Gunk Shot or Poison Jab, that was an okay check. But as you can see, it's like you go down the list, there's really not a lot that's great. Things like Berserker and Magneton, they're fine checks in a vacuum. The main problem, of course, being that unless you're always doubling them in to match Florges switching in, odds are what's going to just happen is you're going to be taking over a third of your HP, and this is exacerbated by Florges potentially turning into a Super Fairy type with Terra Stylization. And then you're just not really switching into it ever again. So, Specs is just kind of hard to contend with. I still believe that it's not necessarily that far above a lot of the other breakers we faced. But there's a couple things Florges has over them. It's a little bit faster. And I made this comparison in yesterday's video. But compared to Clawitzer, which is similarly strong, but doesn't really have the bulk, Florges' physical bulk is dreadful, yes, but that special bulk is still insane, even when you're not invested in. And that does limit the pool of revenge killers to you quite a bit. And of course, you've got moves like Trick. That's really helpful, just because otherwise Chansey wouldn't be, a bad switch in at all. Chansey would just perpetually wall you. But it has to be mindful of Trick, because you're just crippled for the rest of the game if you ever catch the specs. And then the last move for Florges was always pretty up in the air. There weren't really a lot of other options you wanted to run here anyway, so Draining Kiss is just kind of preferred for recovery. You could also run, like, if you wanted to, Terra Blast with maybe Terra Ground would be an okay option. It just really wasn't necessary. And then we can talk about the other set. Now, in my post here, I do allude to 2 variants of Calm Mind. I'm going to talk about defensive Calm Mind, though, because I think this set is a little bit more worthwhile to touch from a tiering standpoint. From everyone I talked to, they didn't really think offensive Calm Mind was necessarily problematic. More so that it just added on to Florges' overall set diversity and unpredictability. So it just kind of complicates how you have to try and take it on from Team Preview. And of course, Defensive Calm Mind is really potent because, again, we don't have steel types really in the tier. So your options are either you have to use Terra with like an eel, and unless you're Coil Eel, you're not gonna beat Florges. It's gonna Calm Mind up versus you and just beat you down inevitably. You've got Berserker, but that mon is still pretty uncommon, and you know, Berserker's like the one steel type again that's really contending with Florges. Because something like Magneton, again, if I Terra and I get rid of my weakness to steel, what are you doing exactly? And then I even would say this to Muck, like once I Terra, what are you doing? Something like Quillfish at the very least has Thunder Wave, and that's mildly annoying for Florges at least. You know, Quill could be taunt, meaning you can't set up further versus it. It can run its own Terra so that it's not getting beaten up by your Psychic. It's not like it doesn't have options. It's just Terra Stylization gives you so much counterplay with Florges that you otherwise wouldn't have into a lot of your really good answers. You know, I turn into a poison type, all of a sudden, Muck, your poison jab's resisted. Quillfish, your gunk shot or your poison jab, that's resisted. These mons can still keep up with you, especially Muck if it's Haze, you're just not beating it down, but it's still annoying. And we can even talk about, like, even something like this isn't too bad, because then you have full-on support Florges, but you also have that option to become an insanely potent setup sweeper at any given moment. And I'll even give a shout out to that one tech someone was running on Stall. Scarf Florges with Trick. I don't know what their full set was, but I could imagine something like this. Where we've seen this before in OU last generation, where Clefable ran Magic Guard with Trick, or Sticky Barb, but like, I guess Magic Guard isn't too relevant to Scarf. But we saw Clef run Scarf Trick, because you were so good at luring in Pokemon like Heatran, for example. And it kind of applied to Florges here too, where you're so good at drawing in something like Muck, or Berserker, or Quillfish, you can just really easily dump the Scarf off on them and say, okay, have fun. Have fun. Yeah, guys, Florges is banned now. I don't really know if we're going to be looking at anything else, because if we look at the survey real quick, nothing else other than kind of Bruxish got too much support for action, so I'm sure we'll be back to talk about this more in the coming days, but thank you all for watching. I hope you've been enjoying NU, and once again, thanks to all the new subscribers that joined. Hope you'll stick around, man. I'm gonna have some banging content for you over the coming months. I hope y'all enjoy the rest of your day, though. I'll catch you next time. Peace.